This video is meant to share some interesting information about ponds, and especially one item that we're going to deal with in detail is when you wake up in the morning and a sudden loss of water in your pond. And some things I've learned after 28 years of ponding. Now, my son and I dug this pond 28 years ago, and over that 28-year period, I've learned a lot of little tricks and tips, things that might be helpful if you're a pond owner. I'd like to share some of them on this video. Now, to be honest, once we made this pond, when we started digging, every day we made it a foot bigger than the day before until we got to this dimension, which is about roughly 16 by 18 and 30 inches deep. Now, recently we had what I call a total meltdown, which has happened before. It's not the first time. But I came out early in the morning to feed the fish, and there was basically 6 inches of water in the pond instead of the normal 30. And it is what it looked like when I woke up, went over to the pond, which normally the water is right up to the top. It had gone down about 80%, 85% maybe. But the first thing to get in order is to pump out some of the water that's left there into some tubs, because we need that pond water to keep the fish alive while we're doing any work inside the pond. If we have to do a patch or if we have to move rocks around, no matter what we have to do. So I remember in the past that had happened before, and the first time it happened, I was really panic-stricken. I thought, oh, the liner has a hole in it, and then to find the hole in the liner, as far down as the water goes, when it stops going down, you have to walk the perimeter and find the hole or the leak. Well, that proved to be an easy fix the first time, and I'll explain why. So what had happened the first time, the liner itself had come out from under the rock and fallen in, and the water had all fallen behind it. So that was really an easy fix, and it wasn't a big problem to repair it. The problem was I had to put all new water in the pond, and that was a problem. Now, lucky for me, I have an expert in fish, all the things that have to go on with fish, indoor fish tanks and outdoor ponds, Dave Midgley. Thank you, Dave, ahead of time. And what he told me was, because the water was super low, it was only maybe 6 inches deep at the time, that liner had fallen right into the pond. What the real issue was you had to add just a little water each time. And you couldn't just fill it, because the fish will die if you put too much water in at one time. So once I understood the concept of you had to have the normal biology of water that fish were living in, you just couldn't put tap water there. And it was very easy. I added to this pond 2 inches of water a day for probably 2 weeks or so. 2 inches a day, I wound up not losing one fish. So that was good information early in my ponding career. Now, years later, there was a second time that I had a similar issue. I lost a lot of the water, maybe half the water overnight, and I figured out what it was. It was pretty easy to figure it out. I'll show why. Now, I made my own filter when I originally dug the pond. It's lasted 28 years. It's basically 2 buckets, one inside the other. The foam material, all of this stuff comes from Amazon or similar places, pond supply places. But what had happened is I cut a hole in both sides of the bucket so that if this backs up, if the filter itself backs up, and it does from time to time if you don't clean it regularly, what happens, the water will go out those holes into the bigger bucket and then out the tube back into the waterfalls. So that was like having a bypass valve on an oil filter if it clogs up. And because I normally post videos concerning motorcycles, repair and customizing on this channel, this is a rare thing I'm posting something like this. I know about check valves, and that worked out. Once I realized what had happened, and once I had cut those holes, that problem was solved again. But again, adding water little by little back to the pond, so you don't wind up risking the fish. So what had happened, many years had gone by, and it was very uneventful. I've had these fish, many of them, over 20 years. Most of them have been born in the pond. And I don't really have issues with that normally like this on an ongoing basis. But the other day I did have one, and let me really explain. This is really something special. Backtracking the story, I came out and there was probably only 3 inches of water in the pond. The fish were flopping around. I was really distraught, and I thought, again, I go through my sequence of things that's very important. Is it a hole in the liner? Once you determine that, it's not a hole in the liner, and that most people are inclined to think it's a hole in the liner. I got to replace the whole liner. An expensive proposition, and in a case where you have a lot of landscaping and stones around the edge, it's not like just replacing a kiddie pool, that's for sure. So the thing I wanted to share is the sequence of things you can figure out is, if the water goes down, you want to know where the water stops. If there's a hole in the liner, it'll stop there. If there's a hole in the bottom of the liner, you wind up losing all your fish. Now this liner, when I bought it, they said it was going to last 20 years. It's lasted 28. So what I did on this time, it was right down to the bottom almost. What I noticed is where the pump goes in, that goes to the filter, it was level right with the pump. And I thought, uh-oh, what's happening? The pump can't suck any more out. That's why it leveled off at about 6 inches. So I checked this hose thinking, pulled the hose out, stretched it out in the driveway, pressure tested it. No leaks in the hose. And that hose used to be underground, and I'll put it back underground once I'm sure this is all working the way I want. Because you can see from the last meltdown, I still haven't added all the water. And that's coming up in the next week or so. But I'm doing 2 inches a day. Now, once I determined it was not that, then I had to figure out the hose that goes from the filter to the waterfalls. It could be leaking, and it's exactly what it was. I was doing some landscaping back there, and I had kicked the hose. The hose pulled back from the waterfall, and half of the water was going behind the waterfall. And of course, the waterfall is made of rocks, so it's a nice big catch basin for the water. Well, once I figured that out, it was a question of I had to rearrange all the rocks, and you really can't see it from here. I ought to really move over here. I'm trying to share something that you wouldn't think is possible, but the way the water falls down the waterfalls, if you move the hose over here, it kind of gets behind the falls, because the liner, and it was a problem when I made the pond, I only put the liner, the same piece of rubber, there's no joints, goes up over the falls. So the water can get behind the liner under certain conditions, but hopefully that's been resolved right now. Now there is only one other real problem right now. Now normally my fish, when they're in their normal state of flux, they come up, take the food right out of your hand, and I have that on video many times, and I enjoy doing that at least 3 times a day. What I did to train them, and again, this was many people have the different ways of doing this, but I would always, this is the place I would have my coffee in the morning. I wanted to just show this. This is normally where I'll sit and have a cup of coffee, polish up my motorcycle or whatever, and then here, I'd always feed them right here. And one by one, the fish would learn that's where the food is, and then the bigger ones would come over, and little by little. And then after about 2 weeks, they knew before I even fed them. They'd be lining up here like it was a car wash or something, and they were waiting for the food. And then little by little, I could get down on my knees and throw the food, and sooner or later, I'd get down where I was on my elbows. And then I'm guessing, and within another week, especially the big guys would take the food right out of your hand, and I'd always have to yell at them, "Don't bite." And training the fish to take the food right out of your hand is so nice. I enjoy doing this. I do it 3 times a day, of course, and they are just fun. So since we've had the meltdown, I've put in a ruler, gorilla taped it to one of the stones, and I add 2 inches of water a day. And again, thank you, Dave, for good information over the years that I've had the pond. And that, so far, I've been able to recover the water. I always save as much of the pond water as possible. If you still have an inch of water, don't drain it out. You want to have as much of the old pond water and add the new pond water one little bit at a time. So other tips that may be helpful, and I'm going to show this, although a lot of people are not going to believe this. I know I'm going to have people with comments of you're lying or you're not telling the truth. But I have had fish when this pond is full, and what would happen after a rainstorm, it would get right to the top, and every once in a while I would have come out in the morning and there'd be a fish laying here. Now sometimes I'd look and I'd say, that poor fish is dead. He's got to be out of the pond for, oh my God, for a while. He's dry, not moving a bit. He's like a rock. And I'd say always, and I had heard this before, that never bury the fish. Throw them back in the water and just see what happens. And sometimes you throw them out there dead and they float, and that's the end of it. But I've had fish that have been out of the water for a really long time. Put them back in the water, and maybe a minute later I'd see a tail move, a fin move, and one of them is that big orange fish. He was out of the water a long time, and he's back to being one of my regular fish. During the last meltdown, our big orange fish, and he's the biggest one in the pond, he had gotten out more than once. He knocked the lid right off of the tub, and you really have to put heavy stones on there. And my friend went out of the garage and he said, "Hey, one of the fish is out." And we got him back into the tub just in time. Now another tip, in 28 years, we've had herons here. We live near a water sanctuary where herons just reside all year long. So the first time we had a heron, Karen and I came back from shopping. He was sitting right here looking, but he hadn't gotten any fish. And of course we blew the car horn, and I don't want to hurt him, I just want to chase him away. But we did not have this gazebo yet. I'll call it a gazebo even though it's not a gazebo. And what happened is I had my friend Mike Kajeski make this and put a lid on it, and I started growing wisteria from a little baby plant, which now it's the thickness of my arm, and it's totally taken over. Now what it does is two things. By making shade, it minimizes the algae that you have in the water. When the pond is in full sunlight, you're prone to having more algae than if it's in the shade. So that's one really nice feature of having, if you have the option of keeping it in the shade. Any place you put a pond, it's going to be better in the shade. Maybe not for water plants, but it's going to be better for not having algae. And anybody that's ever had a pond with algae and it turns into pea soup, very frustrating. Now another thing, it's in 28 years we've had 2 herons visit the pond, and both of them did not get any fish. But I bought an electronic gizmo that I hooked up that's supposed to keep them away, and of course you can look on the internet, several people make them. They keep predators away and varmints and everything. And I had 2 over the years, but I never know if they kept it away, because as of today we never got another heron. Now another thing that minimizes algae, anybody that's got a pond, you have to have an ultraviolet light. The pump pumps through here, through the filter and out the waterfalls. And again, a professional filter this size, for that size pond, it's thousands of dollars. I made my own and it works just as good. It's not a real high-tech thing, and this material is available. Underneath the material is 5 bags of hair curlers, and that's all you need. And obviously this bucket has holes in the bottom, and a bucket that acts as a check valve, which I've already gone over that. But now there's another thing, is what I do every year. I run this until we have ice on a pond. You're really not supposed to do that. Other people have told me, professional people, that that's not a good idea. I run this until the day I see ice on a pond. Then I take it out, put it away. What happens in the spring, the day the ice melts, and I know there's not going to be any more ice, I turn it on. Now the reason is the filter, at that point in time, there's no algae. Algae doesn't grow when there's ice on a pond. So what happens is I catch this, that I have clear water, and I never get that buildup of, like a lot of people do, they have an algae bloom in the spring that you have 2 weeks or so where you can't see the fish. This, by running that every day that there's not ice on a pond, that's been my cure for that. And the other thing is, and it was Dave that told me this, Dave Midgley, put a new bulb in every year. Even if the old bulb is still good, you lose the killing power. The bulbs are cheap enough, they're about 20 bucks. And that saves you having that green algae. And always store, when the pond is frozen, store the ultraviolet light indoors. Don't leave it out by the pond and just unplug it or whatever. Store it, in my case, I store it in a cellar. Now, after I've had any meltdown where I had to remove the water from the pond and take the fish out, it's not a good idea to touch the fish, or in any way, even a net touching them breaks the slime coat and you subject them to, it's dangerous. It would be best if you could catch them with a bucket. In this case, I've had to use a net, and one of them jumped out of the bucket already, the big orange one, and he was flopping around, and I was afraid he'd really hurt himself. But I was real careful to catch him and get him back in the bucket and put screens on the bucket. It's not a good idea to ever touch the fish. Now, something I might be guilty of and not even want to admit it, but I have heard from people that are experts in raising koi, it's not a good idea to overfeed them. The food that they don't eat tends to make algae grow in the pond and pollute the pond, and koi are relatively dirty fish, so they overfeeding them, you're not doing them a favor. I've always fed the fish wardley food, and just about as much as they've consumed in 5 minutes, and I do it 3 times a day. Now, to me, koi are very, very interesting. They're fun to raise. They have propagated well in this pond, and that's why I have this bucket out here with a taro. It seems like that gives them a successful breeding spot. Many times they don't breed for a while, and all of a sudden one day I see they're breeding, and a month later I have baby blackfish. They're this tiny, and then usually the bigger fish eat them, but some always survive. Of course, anything you can do to aerate the water. Let me explain this. This is a good point. I have 2 of these, I call them aerators. What they do is they just basically aerating the water, just like what I'm doing with the hose. And I got to be careful. I don't want to add more than 2 inches of water here while I'm making this video. But it's the same thing with the waterfall. The waterfall does the same thing. It exposes molecules of the water to oxygen. It's the right word, I think, is aeration. And it benefits the fish. Now, my pond freezes solid in the winter, probably for a month or 2 every winter. And what I do is I keep a bubbler, one that you normally would use for an indoor fish tank, with the kind that has 4 outlets. Keep that bubbler going, and as long as there's a hole in the ice, the methane gas doesn't build up, and the fish are fine. And you don't feed them. Don't feed them in the cold weather. If they don't show interest in food, if they're not up looking for food, if they're just swimming casually, don't feed them. Always interesting to me how you don't feed them for sometimes 2 or 3 months. They come out of hibernation and they're bigger they are than they were when they went in. I guess that's just nature. So another tip, and I have used this to my advantage for many, many years. When I clean the filters, I clean them with a garden hose. I save the dirty water that has the fish residue in it, and I use it in the garden. And you can see, you could figure out the garden here is growing pretty well. Karen, my wife, has a very big love of gardening and growing vegetables. We grow our own vegetables on this little, we call it a farm. It's not really a farm. But everywhere I can put the fish residue, if right from a bucket, and there's a lot of ways other people have told me they do it. The way I do it is just clean the filters. It seems to water it down enough. Pour it right on the plants. And it actually acts exactly like fertilizer, and even the vegetable plants love it. So being honest, it's been 28 years that I've had it, every minute I've had this pond, except the time you have to replace the water like what we're doing right now. And that's years between events. I don't even mind it because I know what'll happen with the fish too is after an event, I call it an event, where they've been out of the water and in a tub. And anytime you take, just another tip, I'm trying to put information that's useful for new people. If you take the fish out of here and put them in a tub, number one, if you put them in a garbage can, a lot of garbage cans leak. And all of mine leaked when I tried that the first time. So I bought tubs. I have tubs that are probably 10 bucks a piece. And those tubs are dedicated to, I pump the water right through the filter, pump it out, put them in the tubs, and put a screen over. Otherwise, and a rock on top of the screen. These big fish, you turn around and they're flopping down the driveway. Now, I've probably had finished most of my adult life and a lot of my childhood, and I've always had fish tanks and 55-gallon tanks and everything. But I've never found anything more satisfying than having a fish outdoors. It kind of seems like it's in their normal, the place they should be. They're not in a totally confined area. I've enjoyed watching the baby fish that have been born in a pond grow, and some of the ones that have survived being eaten by the bigger fish. There's fish you don't really see on this video because they're all black. We have 4 big black fish who never seem to, oh, maybe you can see them here. But you don't see them during the day, but if you turn the lights on at night, it's like they have an eerie glow to them. They're really cool. Now, all the kids in my neighborhood enjoy coming over and feeding the fish. They love the fact that the fish will just take the food right out of your hand. And in a lot of ways, Karen and I have had this part of our life 28 years. And again, thank you to my son Craig, who helped dig the pond. It has been part of my life for basically a long time. And not many things in my life are more enjoyable or relaxing than after a busy day or a day of working on whatever projects you're working on or coming home from work. Just relaxing and feeding the fish. So I hope you enjoyed the video and that this was useful information if you have a pond or anticipate having a pond, or if you've had one of these pond episodes like I've had, and they do happen from time to time. We've had 28 years of good luck. I hope you also enjoy your pond just as much. And thanks so much for watching. And please, please don't forget to feed the fish.